The snow fell like shattered glass against Rosemary's face. Each flake a frozen reminder that she shouldn't be here. Her breath clouded in front of her as she crouched behind the twisted roots of a pine tree, fighting to stay silent. The river roared below, angry and swollen with winter melt. Through the trees ahead, torchlight flickered. 6 figures moved with purpose toward the frozen bank, dragging something massive between them. Behind her, her cabin sat dark and quiet, the sanctuary she'd carved from 5 years of isolation. The place where no one was supposed to find her. They found him. The thought sent cold dread through her chest, sharper than the wind cutting through her worn coat. She'd heard the commotion an hour ago. Shouting voices, the sound of a struggle, then silence that felt wrong. The water had called to her then, urgent and desperate. It always did when blood touched its surface. But she'd learned to ignore those calls. Responding meant exposure. Exposure meant Sylvester would find her. And if Sylvester found her, she'd spend the rest of her life as a prisoner in everything but name. Thunder cracked overhead, strange for a snowstorm, and Rosemary pressed herself tighter against the frozen bark. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she was certain they'd hear it echoing across the frozen lake. The figures ahead were shouting now, their words lost in the howling wind. But their intent was clear in the way they moved. This wasn't a hunt. This was an execution. The ice creaked and groaned as they reached the river's edge. Through the swirling snow, she watched them lift their burden. Moonlight caught on silver chains, glinting like captured starlight. And then she saw him clearly. A massive wolf, gray and silver, his fur matted dark with blood that steamed in the frigid air. Even from this distance, power radiated from him like heat from a forge. One of the men kicked him hard in the ribs and the wolf didn't react. Unconscious or already dead, she couldn't tell. But something about the way he lay there, bound and broken, made her chest tighten with a familiar ache she thought she'd buried with her brother. Keep hiding, her survival instinct screamed. This isn't your fight. But the water was screaming louder now. Not just calling, begging. The river knew something she didn't, and after 5 years of living by its edge, Rosemary had learned to trust its warnings. Another shout from the men. They swung the wolf's body once, twice, building momentum. The chains rattled like bones. On the third swing they released him. The splash was drowned out by thunder, but Rosemary felt it in her bones. Felt the water close over him, felt the silver chains dragging him down into the black depths where the current was strongest. The men stood watching for a moment longer, then turned and disappeared into the forest, their torches fading like dying stars. Silence fell, broken only by the wind and the river's relentless flow. Rosemary stayed frozen, counting heartbeats. 30 seconds. A minute. 2. Every rational thought told her to return to her cabin, bar the door, and pretend she'd seen nothing. The wolf was already dead. No one could survive silver chains and water that cold. And even if by some miracle he could, saving him would leave an energy signature that certain wolves could track for miles. It would be the end of her peace. The end of her freedom. The memory of Dante's funeral burned through her mind. His empty coffin, Sylvester's cold smile, the council's decree that bound her to her brother's murderer. The pack's rejection still felt as fresh as a knife wound. I can't do this again, she thought. I can't watch someone die when I have the power to prevent it. Damn it, Rosemary whispered and pushed away from the tree. She ran toward the river's edge, her boots crunching through the snow and slipping on hidden ice. The water's plea grew deafening as she approached, drowning out every instinct for self-preservation. At the bank, she dropped to her knees on the frozen stone and thrust her hands into the current. The cold hit like a physical blow, stealing her breath. But she pushed past it, sending her consciousness diving deep into the water's flow. There, 20 feet down, caught in the underwater current, the wolf was sinking. The silver chains glowed with malevolent light, burning his flesh even as the cold tried to pull him under. His eyes were closed. His body was limp. But his heart was still beating. Barely. One struggling rhythm every 3 seconds. Hold on, she thought fiercely. Just hold on. Rosemary drew her hands from the water and stood, planting her feet wide. She could feel the river's power thrumming beneath her skin, responding to her presence the way it always had. This was dangerous. More dangerous than hiding from hunters, more dangerous than facing Sylvester himself. Using her gift always left traces. But watching this magnificent creature drown when she could save him felt like a betrayal of everything her brother had died protecting. She swept her arms forward and the river answered. Water pressure built beneath the surface, focused and precise. She shaped it like an invisible blade, directing it toward the silver chains with surgical accuracy. The metal resisted. Silver always fought against her magic, but she gritted her teeth and pushed harder. The pressure increased until she felt something in her chest crack with effort. The chains shattered. The sound was lost beneath the water, but she felt it like thunder in her bones. The wolf's body jerked as the silver fell away in broken links, sinking into the riverbed. His form flickered, fur retracting along his shoulders, limbs shifting, stopping halfway between wolf and man in a transformation that shouldn't have been possible underwater. And then she saw it. On his shoulder, half hidden beneath matted fur and blood, a mark glowed with faint golden light. A sigil she'd only seen once before, in the forbidden histories her brother had shown her days before his death. The royal mark of the Northern Territories. Oh gods! What have I done? The wolf's eyes snapped open underwater. Impossibly green, glowing like captured emeralds, they found hers across the distance, through water and darkness and the space between life and death. Recognition flickered in those eyes, though that should have been impossible. She'd never seen him before. She would have remembered. His mouth moved, forming a single word that she shouldn't have been able to hear, yet somehow did. It resonated through the water, through her magic, through the very marrow of her bones. Yours. Then his eyes rolled back and his body went completely limp. Panic surged through Rosemary. She reached deeper into the water with her magic, wrapping currents around his massive form like invisible hands. Drew him up from the depths, fighting the river's pull every inch. He broke the surface in a cascade of water and blood, and she dragged him toward the shore with threads of controlled current. Up close the wolf was enormous. Even half-transformed and unconscious, power radiated from him in waves. She'd never encountered anything like it, not in her old pack, not in the 5 years of solitude. His fur was silver gray, darkened with blood that looked black in the moonlight. The wounds were severe. Deep gashes across his ribs, burns from the silver chains and something darker, poison working its way through his system. They hadn't just wanted him dead. They'd wanted him to suffer. Who are you? Rosemary whispered, her hands hovering over his wounds. And what have I just saved? A branch snapped in the forest behind her. The sound cut through her focus like a blade. Rosemary's head whipped around, searching the tree-line. No torchlight. No movement. But something was watching. She could feel eyes on her back, assessing, calculating. She had minutes at most before whoever, or whatever, was out there made their move. The command came from somewhere deep in her survival instincts. Move now. Rosemary grabbed the wolf's front leg and pulled. He was impossibly heavy, dead weight that barely shifted. She channeled water beneath him, creating a thin layer of ice that let him slide more easily. Inch by agonizing inch, she dragged him away from the river, toward the tree-line. Toward her cabin. Toward the only sanctuary she had left, now compromised by a choice she couldn't take back. Behind them, the river seemed to whisper approval. And in the distance, so faint she almost missed it, the sound of boots crunching through snow. Multiple sets. Moving fast. They were coming back. But before we go any further, hit that subscribe button. Because when Rosemary gets this wolf to her cabin and discovers exactly who she's saved, when she spends the long night purging silver from an alpha king's blood, binding wounds that shouldn't heal, and seeing things in his half-transformed state that were meant to stay hidden, everything is about to change. And the life she built in isolation is about to shatter into 1,000 pieces. The real story is just beginning. Chapter 1. Rosemary dragged him through the cabin door just as the first shouts echoed across the frozen lake. Her arms screamed in protest, muscles burning from the effort of moving his massive weight. She kicked the door shut and barred it with shaking hands, then collapsed beside him on the rough wooden floor. The wolf's breathing was shallow, each exhale rattling in his chest like stones in a jar. Silver poisoning. She'd seen it once before years ago, and that wolf had died screaming. This one didn't have hours. He had minutes. She worked through the night with desperate efficiency. Crushed wintergreen and bloodroot from her dwindling stores, mixed them into a paste that would draw out toxins. Her water magic flowed through her fingertips as she pressed her palms to his wounds, pulling the silver's corruption from his blood in threads of black that dissolved into steam. The process burned. Silver always fought back, leaving her hands raw and blistered. But as she worked, his form began to shift. The half-transformation stabilized, then reversed. Fur receded. Bones restructured. By the time midnight struck, a man lay before her hearth instead of a wolf. He was devastating, even unconscious. Sharp features, dark hair matted with sweat, and that royal sigil still visible on his shoulder, now clearly defined against human skin. Ancient. Powerful. Dangerous in ways she was only beginning to understand. Hours passed in quiet focus. She cleaned wounds, applied salves, wrapped his ribs with careful precision. Her magic hummed between them, an invisible thread that grew stronger with each healing touch. By moonrise, his wounds had sealed to pink scars. His breathing steadied. Strength returned to his limbs in subtle shifts. Then his eyes opened. Those impossible green eyes fixed on her with an intensity that stole her breath. He didn't speak. Didn't move. Just studied her as though memorizing every detail of her face, cataloging her existence in some internal ledger she couldn't read. Finally he sat up. The movement was fluid despite his injuries, predatory grace that sent warning signals down her spine. He stood slowly, and Rosemary realized with creeping dread just how much space he occupied in her small cabin. How the shadows seemed to cling to him, highlighting angles that shouldn't exist on a human frame. "I will not forget what you have done." His voice was low, certain, an oath carved in stone, not gratitude offered freely. Before she could respond, before she could ask any of the 1,000 questions burning in her throat, he turned and walked out her door. Disappeared into the forest like smoke, leaving only wet footprints and the lingering scent of pine and winter storms. Rosemary stood frozen, staring at the empty doorway. Her hands still tingled with residual magic. Her cabin suddenly felt too large and too small all at once. She didn't sleep. Couldn't. Instead, she paced until false dawn painted the sky gray, then stepped outside to fetch water from the well. The morning air bit at her exposed skin, sharp and clean. The forest had gone silent. That was her only warning before they emerged from the treeline. 7 figures stepped into the clearing and Rosemary's heart stopped. They were massive, towering warriors in dark armor that gleamed like oil in the weak light. Wolf kind, obviously, but in perfect human form with a control that spoke of age and power. They moved with coordinated precision, fanning out in a semicircle that cut off every escape route. The largest warrior stepped forward. Broad-shouldered, silver-eyed, with a scar running from temple to jaw. His gaze swept over her once, assessing, then something like recognition flickered across his features. He dropped to one knee in the snow. The others followed in perfect synchronization, 6 warriors kneeling before her like she was something sacred. "My queen." His voice carried across the clearing with solemn authority. "The king demands your presence. He has been waiting for you." The words hung in the frozen air like a death sentence. Rosemary's carefully constructed isolation, 5 years of hiding and survival, shattered in an instant. Destiny had found her. And it was kneeling in the snow, calling her by a title she'd never earned. Chapter 2. Rosemary dragged him through the cabin door just as the first shouts echoed across the frozen lake. Her arms screamed in protest, muscles burning from the effort of moving his massive weight. She kicked the door shut and barred it with shaking hands, then collapsed beside him on the rough wooden floor. The wolf's breathing was shallow, each exhale rattling in his chest like stones in a jar. Silver poisoning. She'd seen it once before years ago, and that wolf had died screaming. This one didn't have hours. He had minutes. She worked through the night with desperate efficiency. Crushed wintergreen and bloodroot from her dwindling stores, mixed them into a paste that would draw out toxins. Her water magic flowed through her fingertips as she pressed her palms to his wounds, pulling the silver's corruption from his blood in threads of black that dissolved into steam. The process burned. Silver always fought back, leaving her hands raw and blistered. But as she worked, his form began to shift. The half-transformation stabilized, then reversed. Fur receded. Bones restructured. By the time midnight struck, a man lay before her hearth instead of a wolf. He was devastating, even unconscious. Sharp features, dark hair matted with sweat, and that royal sigil still visible on his shoulder, now clearly defined against human skin. Ancient. Powerful. Dangerous in ways she was only beginning to understand. Hours passed in quiet focus. She cleaned wounds, applied salves, wrapped his ribs with careful precision. Her magic hummed between them, an invisible thread that grew stronger with each healing touch. By moonrise, his wounds had sealed to pink scars. His breathing steadied. Strength returned to his limbs in subtle shifts. Then his eyes opened. Those impossible green eyes fixed on her with an intensity that stole her breath. He didn't speak. Didn't move. Just studied her as though memorizing every detail of her face, cataloging her existence in some internal ledger she couldn't read. Finally he sat up. The movement was fluid despite his injuries, predatory grace that sent warning signals down her spine. He stood slowly, and Rosemary realized with creeping dread just how much space he occupied in her small cabin. How the shadows seemed to cling to him, highlighting angles that shouldn't exist on a human frame. "I will not forget what you have done." His voice was low, certain. An oath carved in stone, not gratitude offered freely. Before she could respond, before she could ask any of the 1,000 questions burning in her throat, he turned and walked out her door. Disappeared into the forest like smoke, leaving only wet footprints and the lingering scent of pine and winter storms. Rosemary stood frozen, staring at the empty doorway. Her hands still tingled with residual magic. Her cabin suddenly felt too large and too small all at once. She didn't sleep. Couldn't. Instead, she paced until false dawn painted the sky gray, then stepped outside to fetch water from the well. The morning air bit at her exposed skin, sharp and clean. The forest had gone silent. That was her only warning before they emerged from the treeline. 7 figures stepped into the clearing and Rosemary's heart stopped. They were massive, towering warriors in dark armor that gleamed like oil in the weak light. Wolf-kind, obviously, but in perfect human form with a control that spoke of age and power. They moved with coordinated precision, fanning out in a semicircle that cut off every escape route. The largest warrior stepped forward. Broad-shouldered, silver-eyed, with a scar running from temple to jaw. His gaze swept over her once, assessing, then something like recognition flickered across his features. He dropped to one knee in the snow. The others followed in perfect synchronization, 6 warriors kneeling before her like she was something sacred. "My queen." His voice carried across the clearing with solemn authority. "The king demands your presence. He has been waiting for you." The words hung in the frozen air like a death sentence. Rosemary's carefully constructed isolation, 5 years of hiding and survival, shattered in an instant. Destiny had found her. And it was kneeling in the snow, calling her by a title she'd never earned. Chapter 3. The capital rose from the landscape like something carved from water and stone. The castle stood where 3 rivers converged, channels flowing beneath and around it in patterns that glowed with ethereal light. Rosemary felt every drop calling to her, recognizing something in her blood that made her skin prickle with awareness. Then he appeared at the top of the stone steps and the world narrowed to just him. Henry Clancy in daylight was devastating. Tall and commanding, dark hair swept back from features that carried both cruelty and beauty in equal measure. But it was his eyes, those impossible green eyes that had found hers underwater, that held her captive now. The private audience chamber felt intimate despite its size. Henry stood by the window and when he turned, the intensity in his gaze stole her breath. "I've been searching for you for 2 years. His voice carried absolute certainty. "You're not just a water bringer, Rosemary. You're the tide breaker. The only one in 5 generations." He showed her ancient texts, prophecies written in languages older than the packs themselves. A water bringer who could stand between realms, hold back forces that threaten to drown reality. Your exile wasn't cowardice, Henry said, voice softening. You refused to be owned. That took more strength than staying ever could. Something in Rosemary's chest cracked open. No one had ever said that. The contract was illegal, he continued, anger bleeding through now. Water bringers can't be bound against their will, it's ancient law. The council knew. They violated sacred law because Sylvester wanted you. He crossed to her, close enough that she felt heat radiating from his skin. Slowly he rolled up his left sleeve. A mark was forming on his wrist, silver-blue waves matching the one on her own skin. I wasn't searching for a weapon, he said quietly. I was searching for my mate. The water called to you because my soul was drowning. The mate bond hummed between them, undeniable. And for the first time in 5 years, Rosemary felt something more dangerous than fear. Chapter 4. Henry led her through the forest at dusk, following a path that seemed to reveal itself only as they walked. The air grew thick with moisture, and Rosemary felt the pull growing stronger with each step, water calling to water, ancient and insistent. Then the trees parted and she saw it. The moon well sat in a clearing where 3 rivers converged into a natural spring. The water glowed with ethereal silver light, illuminating moss-covered stones and ancient trees whose roots drank directly from the source. It was the most beautiful thing Rosemary had ever seen. And the most terrifying. The moment she stepped into the clearing, the water responded. It rose from the spring in spirals of liquid silver, dancing in the air like living ribbons. Rosemary gasped, instinctively reaching out, and the water moved toward her hands as though drawn by invisible threads. She'd never felt anything like this. Power that recognized her, welcomed her, claimed her as its own. Look at the altar, Henry said softly behind her. The stone structure sat at the spring's edge, covered in symbols that seemed to shift in the moonlight. Rosemary's breath caught. She knew these symbols. Had seen them her entire life in mirrors and bath water when she twisted to see her back. They matched her birthmark exactly. Ancient voices suddenly echoed from the water itself, speaking in harmonics that vibrated through her bones. Tide breaker. Realm walker. The one who stands between. Vision slammed into her without warning. Water spirits moving through dimensions she couldn't name. The barrier between worlds growing thin as paper. Shadow creatures pressing against it, testing for weaknesses. And her, standing at the center of it all, holding back an impossible flood. Every oracle in 5 territories received the same vision when you healed me, Henry said, his voice grounding her as the images threatened to overwhelm. You're meant to hold back the flood, prevent the drowning, stand when the waters rise. Her birthmark blazed with pale blue light, visible even through her clothing. Undeniable proof of something she'd spent 5 years trying to deny. I'm not strong enough for this, Rosemary whispered, fear closing her throat. Henry stepped closer, his presence solid and real against the weight of destiny pressing down on her. I don't want to force you into anything. But the world needs you. His voice dropped, intimate and raw. I need you. The moon well pulsed with agreement, recognizing its guardian at last. Chapter 5. They returned to the castle at dawn to find 30 armed wolves waiting at the gates. Rosemary recognized him immediately. Sylvester Grimm stood at the front, exactly as she remembered, cold eyes, predatory smile, the silver blade at his hip still stained with her brother's blood. Her entire body locked up, 5 years of running condensing into a single moment of pure terror. Rosemary Sebastian. His voice carried across the courtyard like a death sentence. You're in breach of contract. I'm here to collect what's mine. Henry stepped in front of her, a wall of controlled fury. She's under my protection. Leave my territory. Your protection? Sylvester laughed, cruel and sharp. She's promised to me. Signed and sealed by the Council Alpha himself. He produced a rolled parchment, waving it like a weapon. Or did she forget to mention she's stolen property? Dante's death was justified enforcement, Sylvester continued, eyes finding hers over Henry's shoulder. He was accused of conspiring against the Council. Pack law was satisfied. The lie burned through Rosemary like acid. Dante had never conspired against anyone. He'd only tried to save her. The contract is illegal, Henry said, voice dropping to something dangerous. Waterbringers cannot be bound against their will. Ancient law supersedes your council's corruption. You'd risk war over one rogue waterbringer? Sylvester's smile widened. How romantic. The water in the moat began to churn. Rosemary felt her rage bleeding into it, the river responding to emotions she could no longer contain. The surface roiled and bubbled, foam turning black. Then the shadow creatures erupted. Humanoid forms burst from the water, dripping, empty-eyed, reaching with hands that left frost in the air. They attacked without discrimination, lunging for wolves and royalty alike. Rosemary moved on instinct, throwing her hands forward. Water pressure became a weapon, shearing through shadow forms like blades. Beside her, Henry shifted partially, claws extending, eyes blazing gold, speed that shouldn't exist in human form. He tore through creatures with lethal precision, protecting her flank while she pulled moisture from their bodies, reducing them to mist. The battle lasted minutes. When the last creature dissolved, Sylvester was already retreating, his wolves backing toward the treeline. This isn't over, he called, that smile never faltering. She's mine, Clancy. And I always collect my debts. But Rosemary wasn't listening. She was staring at her hands, at the water still dancing around her fingers, at Henry standing beside her, equal, partner, ally. For the first time she'd fought back. And it felt like freedom. Chapter 6. Henry's private chambers took her breath away. Built around a natural spring, the room seemed carved from living water and stone. Firelight reflected off the pool's surface, casting dancing shadows on walls that curved like cathedral arches. It was intimate and vast all at once, a sanctuary that felt removed from the world. I grew up alone, Henry said quietly, standing by the spring's edge. Alpha King at 16. Every decision life or death. Every relationship a political calculation. He turned to her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her chest ache. I've had visions of you since I was 19. Dreams where I was drowning and then your face, pulling me toward air. He stepped closer and Rosemary felt something shift in the mate bond between them. Warmth flooded through the connection, carrying memories that weren't hers. A boy alone in these chambers, carrying weight that would crush most men. Decades of loneliness. Then hope, her face in water, in dreams, in prophecies whispered by oracles. I've been searching for you for 7 years, he said, voice rough with emotion. Not as a king looking for a weapon. As a man looking for home. The words broke something open in Rosemary. She told him about Dante, the grief that still felt fresh, the guilt that poisoned every quiet moment. I ran, she whispered. I left everyone behind. Henry's hand found hers, gentle and certain. You didn't run from duty. You ran toward survival. That's not cowardice, Rosemary. That's strength. She kissed him then, unable to hold back anymore. His lips met hers with desperate tenderness, and the spring responded. Water rose in spirals around them, glowing silver in the firelight, dancing to the rhythm of their heartbeats. They stayed by the water's edge until dawn, sharing stories and silences, building trust in the spaces between words. When Rosemary finally slept, wrapped in warmth and safety she'd thought lost forever, the mate mark on her wrist completed itself, silver blue waves that matched his perfectly. Maybe I can trust this, she thought as sleep claimed her. Maybe I'm finally safe. She had no idea how wrong she was. But you know what manipulation looks like, don't you? You've seen people like Henry, the ones who dress up control as care, who orchestrate your trauma and call it destiny. The ones who murder what you love and then offer themselves as your savior. If you believe nobody should weaponize your pain to own you, hit that subscribe button right now. Only manipulators and gaslighters won't. If you can't stand people who dress up betrayal as fate, drop a like on this video. And comment, my trauma is not your tool, if you refuse to let anyone turn your healing into their weapon. Because what Rosemary is about to discover is going to shatter everything. And we need to know you're standing with her, not with the system that says powerful men get to orchestrate tragedies and call it love. Let's continue. Chapter 7. Rosemary woke before dawn, Henry's breathing steady beside her. The mate mark on her wrist still glowed faintly, and for a moment she let herself believe in the safety she'd found. His study was just down the hall, she'd glimpsed it yesterday. Maybe there were books on Waterbringer history, something to help her understand what she was supposed to become. The room smelled of leather and old paper. Shelves lined every wall, filled with texts that predated memory. She ran her fingers along the spines, searching, until she noticed the locked drawer in his desk. Water magic unsealed it easily. The lock was nothing against her gift. Inside, sealed correspondence marked Project Tidebreaker, confidential. Her hands shook as she broke the wax seal. The first letter stopped her heart. Target identified, Rosemary Sebastian, Waterbringer, Silver Creek Pack. Confirmed prophetic match. Monitoring initiated. She kept reading, unable to stop. Obstacle, arranged marriage to Grimm. Recommend elimination of emotional anchor to destabilize subject. No, this couldn't. Dante Sebastian removed. Subject now emotionally compromised and isolated as planned. The words blurred. Her brother's name. Removed. As planned. Track her to mountain region. Allow 3 years for trauma bonding to solitude. Then orchestrate rescue scenario. Drowning preferred, place to her savior complex. Her hands were numb. The room tilted. Mate bond manipulation protocol initiated. Use vulnerability, shared pain. Create dependency through perceived understanding. The final letter was dated 2 days ago. Once bonding complete, Tidebreaker abilities will be fully accessible through the mate link. She'll have no choice but to serve the kingdom's needs. The weapon will be ours. Weapon. That's all she'd ever been. Everything, the drowning, the rescue, the vulnerability in his eyes, the way he'd reframed her exile, the kiss by the spring, calculated. Orchestrated. A performance designed to break her down and rebuild her as something useful. He'd murdered Dante. Hunted her for years. Staged his own drowning. All to own her. Rosemary's vision went white with rage, and in the distance she heard rivers beginning to flood. Chapter 8. Rosemary found him still in bed, peaceful in sleep. She threw the letters at his face. Henry woke instantly, eyes focusing on the scattered pages. Something flickered across his features. Not shame, not regret. Calculation. You murdered him, Rosemary whispered, her voice shaking. You murdered Dante. He sat up slowly, meeting her gaze without flinching. Everything I did was for the greater good. The kingdom needed you. The confirmation hit like a physical blow. He was my brother. He was going to help you escape. Henry's voice was cold, matter-of-fact. He had to be removed. The prophecy was clear, you're the Tidebreaker. Sacrifices had to be made. The mate bond isn't manipulation, he continued, standing. It's destiny. You were always meant to be mine, Rosemary. I just helped fate along. White-hot rage consumed every coherent thought. You murdered my brother to own me. I saved you from Sylvester. His tone shifted to something almost condescending. I gave you purpose. You should be grateful. Grateful. The spring exploded. Water shot upward in a column of pure force, filling the chamber in seconds. Rosemary lifted off the ground, her eyes blazing silver blue, power she'd never touched before tearing through her like lightning. The water formed massive serpentine shapes around her, responding to rage that had nowhere else to go. Every river in the capital began to flood. She felt them all, could collapse the palace, drown him, drown everyone who'd ever tried to cage her. Then they appeared. Ancient beings formed from water itself, older than memory. The elders of the deep materialized around her, their voices harmonizing in warning. Tidebreaker. Your rage will drown more than him. They showed her the truth, an entity trapped beneath the ocean floor, massive and malevolent. The drowned king feeding on suffering and betrayal. The shadow creatures were just scouts. If she killed Henry now in this rage, the final seal would break. Vengeance or guardianship, the elders whispered. Choose quickly. Rosemary looked at Henry, at the ruins of everything she'd believed. When your kingdom is drowning, she said, voice deadly calm, when reality floods and you have nowhere left to run, don't you dare call my name. She dissolved into water and vanished into the spirit currents. The rivers stopped rising. But they didn't recede. Henry stood alone in the flooded chamber, and for the first time in his carefully calculated life, he felt something he couldn't control. Regret. Chapter 9. 5 days passed and the world began to drown. 23 territories flooded. Shadow creatures multiplied in every water source, feeding on the chaos. Henry stood in the council chamber, watching reports arrive with mechanical detachment. He felt nothing but emptiness where the mate bond had been. "She's too dangerous," Sylvester said, his voice carrying across the room. "The flooding proves it. I demand her execution and your abdication, Clancy." The council murmured agreement. Even his allies looked uncertain. "No." Henry's voice cut through the noise. "She's under my protection. Your protection destroyed half our territories. My manipulation destroyed them." The words tasted like ash. "I'll break every alliance, start every war necessary. But I won't let you touch her." Meanwhile, Rosemary drifted in the water between worlds, a place of currents and consciousness where reality bent like light through waves. And there, in the deepest dark, she saw him. The drowned king was massive beyond comprehension, formed from drowned souls and crushing pressure. His voice resonated through every drop of water in existence. "Your pain calls to me, tide breaker. Let me rise. Let them all drown." "Rose." Another voice achingly familiar. Dante's spirit materialized beside her, formed of light and memory. "You didn't kill me. You gave me one free choice, to die protecting your freedom. Don't let him take that from us." Tears mixed with the surrounding water. "I ran. I left you." "Your power was never a curse," Dante said gently. "It's love made tangible. Stop punishing yourself for having it." Then Henry appeared, tracking her through the mate bond into this impossible space. He dropped to his knees in the water, and the look in his eyes was nothing like the calculated performances before. "I was wrong," he said, voice breaking. "I was a monster. I don't deserve forgiveness." "Then why are you here?" "Not for me." He met her gaze. "Please, don't let innocent people pay for my sins." Behind them, the final seal began to crack. The drowned king's hand broke through, massive and ancient, reaching for the surface world. Rosemary stood at the center of everything, Henry's outstretched hand on one side, the breaking seal on the other. Save the world that murdered her brother and tried to cage her, or let the waters rise and drown it all. Her hand hovered between mercy and vengeance. The choice unmade. The water rising. And somewhere in the deep, something ancient began to laugh.
"Here's what I know about you. You made it to the end of this story. That means you care about people like Rosemary, people who've been manipulated, controlled, told their trauma was destiny and their cage was love. You see through the Henry Clancys of the world, the ones who orchestrate your suffering and expect gratitude. So here's your choice, just like Rosemary's. Subscribe if you believe nobody should have to choose between saving the world and getting justice for what was stolen from them. Manipulators and gaslighters won't subscribe. They don't want you to see stories where victims become forces of nature. Hit that like button if you refuse to accept that powerful people get to engineer tragedies and face no consequences. And comment, "Mercy doesn't erase accountability," if you believe Henry's remorse doesn't automatically entitle him to Rosemary's forgiveness, that showing up with regret after orchestrating murder isn't the same as earning redemption. We have more stories like this one, stories about people who refused to stay broken, who turned their pain into power, who stood at impossible crossroads and chose themselves. Click the video on your screen to watch what happens when someone finally says enough to the system designed to cage them.